The night of November 12, 2023, began like any other in Woodland Heights, a quiet suburban town tucked away in the hills of California. But by the morning, it would be irrevocably changed. In the stillness of their home on Maple Avenue, a horrifying act would unfold, shattering the idyllic image of the Harrison family. A woman's life was about to be snuffed out in the most violent way, setting off a chain of events that would expose dark secrets and unravel everything the family had worked to build. Liam Harrison, a sharp, well-groomed lawyer at Parker & Company in San Francisco, was the epitome of success. At 32, he had already achieved what most could only dream of, his career skyrocketing, his social circle enviable, and his marriage to Sophia Bennett, a stunning, talented curator at the San Francisco Museum of Art, was the stuff of local legend. They were young, successful, and deeply in love, admired by friends, colleagues, and even strangers who wished they could have what they did. But appearances can be deceiving, and beneath the surface of their seemingly perfect life, a storm had been quietly brewing for months. Sophia, beautiful and intelligent, was more than just a perfect wife. She was an independent woman with a vision of her own, building a life with Liam and her career. But no matter how much she tried, she could never win the approval of Liam's mother, Eleanor Harrison, the formidable matriarch who had shaped her son into the man he was today. Eleanor was a woman of influence, born into one of Woodland Heights' founding families, and her dominance over Liam was a well-known fact. She had a presence that commanded attention, and no one, least of all her son, dared to question her authority. From the moment Sophia entered the picture, Eleanor had seen her as a threat. A young, free-spirited woman who dared to love her son. Eleanor had invested years in molding Liam into the perfect man, and she wasn't about to let some woman from outside their world take him away. The cracks in their relationship began to show when Liam brought Sophia home for the first time. Eleanor's cold reception was obvious to everyone. Her smile never quite reached her eyes as she appraised the woman who had captured her son's heart. But despite Eleanor's icy disapproval, Liam and Sophia's love flourished. They married in the summer of 2020, a lavish ceremony attended by everyone in Woodland Heights. As Liam kissed his bride at the altar, many of their friends swore they saw a shadow pass over Eleanor's face, though no one dared to mention it. The cracks in the perfect facade of the Harrison family had begun to form, but no one had yet seen the destruction that would follow. They settled into a beautiful home on Maple Avenue, a stone's throw from the heart of Woodland Heights. On the outside, everything appeared perfect. Liam thrived at his law firm, earning respect and admiration for his work in environmental law, while Sophia breathed new life into the museum, curating exhibits that brought national attention. Their social gatherings, often filled with dinner parties and charity events, painted the picture of the quintessential American dream. But the picture-perfect exterior was far from the reality within. Beneath the carefully constructed layers of success and respectability, something far darker was at play. Eleanor's subtle control over her son's life was no longer a quiet whisper, it was becoming a force that could not be ignored. The once vibrant relationship between Liam and Sophia was beginning to show signs of strain, and the tension between mother and wife was escalating to a breaking point. As the weeks passed, Eleanor's visits to their home became more frequent, more unannounced. And with every visit, her critique of Sophia became sharper. "Your house is too quiet," Eleanor would remark, her eyes scanning the room, as though seeking some imperfection to point out. "Your work seems to keep you busy, how admirable, but do you ever think of slowing down?" The comments were always laced with a smile, but the underlying venom was impossible to miss. Sophia, always poised, would smile politely, but Liam, caught in the middle, could see the strain on her face. She was no longer the vibrant, spirited woman he had married, the constant criticism had begun to wear on her. And though he tried to soothe her hurt feelings, the damage was done. What started as subtle tension was now a battle for control of Liam's heart, and his mind. The stage was set. Eleanor's manipulation, as insidious as it was, had begun to take hold. The perfect family was about to fall apart, and no one could have predicted how far the damage would go. The roots of Liam Harrison's complicated relationship with his mother, Eleanor, ran deep. Their bond, built on years of devotion, could never be understood by an outsider. To everyone who knew them, Eleanor was the archetype of a loving, dedicated mother, always present, always involved. But what appeared as a loving maternal bond to the world was, in reality, a tight grip that extended far beyond the bounds of normalcy. It wasn't just care. It wasn't even love. It was control, obsession, and a deep fear of losing the only person who mattered to Eleanor. Liam's father, Thomas Harrison, had been a man of great stature, respected in their small town of Woodland Heights. Eleanor and Thomas had seemed the perfect pair, both born into old money, their marriage an ideal of stability. But when Liam was just 7 years old, Thomas died unexpectedly, his passing leaving a gaping hole in Eleanor's world. The grief that followed was all-consuming, and it wasn't long before Eleanor's entire focus shifted entirely to Liam, her only child. In a way, Thomas's death marked the moment when Liam became the center of Eleanor's universe, the object of her obsessive love. And as Liam grew older, so did her hold over him. Eleanor's way of loving her son was smothering. In her eyes, no one could love him the way she did. She micromanaged every aspect of his life, from the friends he associated with, to the clothes he wore, to the activities he participated in. It wasn't that Eleanor was intentionally cruel, at least, not at first, but she had a singular vision for her son. Liam was to grow up to be someone extraordinary, someone who could carry on the legacy of the Harrison name, someone who would never abandon her. And so, from the moment he could walk and talk, Liam was shaped to be a reflection of his mother's will. Eleanor's expectations were never simple or small. They were grand, often overwhelming, and always present. She enrolled him in the best schools, pushed him to excel in every subject, and made sure he was surrounded by people who could elevate him. At first, Liam was a willing participant, he had no choice, after all. Her approval was the only kind of love he knew. And so, he worked hard, made sacrifices, and grew into the golden boy Eleanor had always envisioned. Yet, as he grew older, cracks began to appear. The pressures of perfection, the unrelenting expectations, and the never-ending scrutiny weighed on Liam in ways Eleanor couldn't see, or perhaps refused to see. The more he excelled, the more she demanded. His grades, his behavior, his social life, all were molded according to her vision. And while he performed, while he delivered on her every expectation, a part of him felt stifled, suffocated by the very love that should have been freeing. In high school, Liam was the ideal student. Popular, athletic, and a model son. But to those who truly knew him, something darker lurked beneath the surface. His best friend, Oliver Grant, would often catch a glimpse of Liam's quiet desperation. There were times I'd see it in his eyes, like he was drowning, but he couldn't call for help, Oliver later recalled, his voice thick with the memory. But those moments were fleeting. Every time, Liam would shake it off, putting on the facade of the perfect son for his mother. Yet, despite his outward success, there were times when Oliver saw through the cracks, a boy desperately trying to escape his mother's suffocating hold, even if he didn't know how to. Liam's first real taste of independence came when he left for college at the University of California, Berkeley. It was there that he truly began to find himself. Away from Eleanor's watchful eye, he discovered new passions, new ideas, and most importantly, he encountered a new world, one that wasn't bound by his mother's rules. It was also where he met Sophia Bennett. A vivacious, free-spirited art history major, Sophia was everything Liam wasn't: spontaneous, independent, and unafraid to challenge the norms. She was like a breath of fresh air after years of feeling trapped in a gilded cage of Eleanor's making. For Liam, it was love at first sight. Sophia opened his eyes to the world beyond the sterile, meticulously curated life Eleanor had built for him. She made him question things he had never dared to before, encouraging him to see life differently. Their relationship was electric, full of passion and energy, the kind that young couples in love always think is invincible. Sophia was his escape, his chance to live a life that was his own. But to Eleanor, Sophia represented something far more dangerous, a threat. From the very first time Liam introduced Sophia to his mother, Eleanor saw her as an interloper. As much as she smiled and extended polite pleasantries, her eyes never quite warmed when they rested on Sophia. She had always imagined Liam would marry someone just like her, someone who would understand and respect the control she had over his life. But Sophia was nothing like her. She was a force of nature, unapologetically herself, and that made Eleanor uncomfortable. When Liam brought Sophia home to Woodland Heights for the first time, the tension in the air was palpable. Eleanor's smile was polite but stiff, her cold gaze running over Sophia like a judge examining a criminal. Every gesture, every word from Sophia was scrutinized. "Your work is quite impressive," Eleanor had remarked at dinner, but the words were laced with a criticism Sophia was quick to pick up on. The subtle jabs about Sophia's career, her background, and her lack of understanding about family values left a bitter taste in the air. Despite Eleanor's veiled disapproval, Liam and Sophia's relationship blossomed. They fell in love, truly and deeply, and decided to marry in the summer of 2020. Their wedding was grand, attended by everyone in Woodland Heights, with Eleanor once again in the front row, offering her support, though her smile remained tight and calculated. As Liam kissed his bride, the world around them cheered, but in the shadowed corner of the reception hall, Eleanor's eyes held something else, something darker, something that foreshadowed the storm to come. The Harrison family, from the outside, had it all. The perfect son. The perfect wife. The perfect life. But behind closed doors, the cracks in their facade were growing wider, and the carefully constructed world Eleanor had built was on the verge of collapse. As Liam and Sophia settled into their married life in their charming Woodland Heights home, the tension between Sophia and Eleanor simmered beneath the surface, a quiet storm threatening to tear apart the delicate fabric of their seemingly perfect world. Eleanor, though outwardly polite and composed, could never fully accept that Liam had chosen someone outside the carefully controlled circle she had envisioned for him. Sophia was not the docile, obedient daughter-in-law Eleanor had hoped for. She was vibrant, opinionated, and fiercely independent, qualities that, to Eleanor, felt like a direct challenge to her place as the central figure in Liam's life. At first, the friction was subtle. Eleanor's visits to their home on Maple Avenue began with the usual air of civility. She would arrive unannounced, always eager to check in on her son and his wife, but her underlying disapproval was evident in every glance and comment. Sophie, ever the gracious wife, did her best to make Eleanor feel welcome, but it soon became clear that no matter how hard she tried, nothing she did would ever be good enough for Liam's mother. Liam, caught in the middle, tried to play peacemaker, smoothing over the discomfort with shallow assurances. "Mom, I know you're worried, but we're doing fine," he would say, his voice tinged with forced optimism. He never seemed to see the cracks forming in their relationship, or perhaps, he was too deeply entrenched in the suffocating cocoon of his mother's influence to notice. Eleanor, for her part, never missed an opportunity to point out what she perceived as Sophia's shortcomings. "The house looks fine, I suppose, but it could use a little more personality," Eleanor would comment on the decor, her eyes scanning the room with the precision of a critic. Her words, coated in sweetness, were always designed to plant seeds of doubt in Sophia's mind about her ability to manage her new role as a wife. Sophia, frustrated but trying to maintain her composure, would nod politely, forcing a smile. "I'm working on it, Eleanor. Just adjusting to the new schedule at the museum." But the tension never dissipated. Each meeting, each conversation with Eleanor left Sophia feeling more isolated, as if the woman she had married was slowly slipping away from her, becoming a stranger under his mother's thumb. The constant need to prove herself, to prove her worth to Eleanor, wore Sophia down. She began to withdraw, becoming quieter in social gatherings, her once vibrant laughter replaced by a muted smile. The woman who had entered their marriage full of life and optimism was slowly being replaced by someone who questioned her every move. Meanwhile, Liam, torn between his wife and his mother, found himself more and more distant. He spent more late nights at the office, claiming he was simply busy with work, but Sophia knew the truth. The lines of communication between them grew strained, and the easy intimacy they once shared became elusive. Liam, unable or unwilling to confront the source of the tension, became increasingly absorbed in his work and in the need to meet his mother's unspoken expectations. He no longer saw Sophia as the vibrant woman he married. Instead, he saw her through the lens of his mother's influence, too independent, too busy, too distant. In Eleanor's eyes, Sophia had never truly been good enough for Liam, and she was determined to drive that point home, no matter the cost. Each comment, each subtle jab at Sophia's career, her social life, and even her choice of friends only served to reinforce the idea in Liam's mind that he needed to choose between his wife and his mother. Sophia, sensing the growing divide between them, tried to bridge the gap. She suggested vacation getaways, nights out, anything to recapture the connection they once had. But every time, Liam's response was the same, apathetic, distracted. His mind, once sharp and focused on their future together, now seemed preoccupied with something, or someone, else. "You're always working, Liam. Maybe we need a break," Sophia would suggest, her voice tinged with both desperation and hope. But Liam, ever the dutiful son, would brush off her suggestions, always responding with a polite smile but a vacant stare. "I'll be fine, sophomore. It's just work. We'll figure it out." But the cracks were widening, and even Sophia could no longer ignore the weight of Eleanor's influence pressing down on their marriage. The woman she had once loved, the man she had married, was slowly slipping away from her, piece by piece. And as much as Sophia tried to maintain her composure, she could feel herself starting to unravel. The once solid foundation of their relationship was now built on fragile assumptions and unspoken resentments. Liam, meanwhile, found himself struggling with a growing unease. His thoughts were increasingly clouded by doubt, not just about Sophia but about himself. Eleanor's words, once a comfort, now seemed like commands he had no choice but to follow. His sense of identity, once tied to his wife, was now intertwined with the expectations his mother had placed on him from the moment he was born. In the quiet moments, when he allowed himself to think, Liam could feel the pressure of those expectations, squeezing tighter and tighter. It wasn't until one fateful afternoon, when Eleanor paid an unexpected visit to their home, that the tension would finally explode. Sophia, who had been working on an art exhibit for the museum, found herself once again caught between the two people who defined her life. Eleanor had come unannounced, of course, and as always, her critique began the moment she stepped through the door. "Sophia, dear, don't you think the museum could use more modern pieces?" "It's so predictable," Eleanor remarked, her eyes sweeping over the paintings displayed in the living room. "It's just not quite exciting enough." Sophia's smile faltered, but she held her ground. "I'm doing my best, Eleanor." The remark stung more than it should have. She knew Eleanor's approval was something she would never have, but that didn't make it any less painful. Eleanor's subtle attacks on Sophia's work, her place in the family, her worth, were starting to feel like a constant weight pressing down on her. Liam, who had been in the kitchen, overheard the exchange. For a moment, he froze, unsure of how to respond. Should he defend his wife, as he once would have done without hesitation? Or should he stay silent, as he had done more times than he cared to admit? But the damage was done. The strain between Liam and Sophia, now heightened by his mother's silent control, was visible to anyone who cared to look. Eleanor's subtle manipulations had succeeded in driving a wedge between them, and though Liam tried to ignore it, the cracks in their marriage were now too deep to mend easily. The stage was set. A confrontation was inevitable. The Harrison family's facade was crumbling, and no one, not even Liam, could predict how far the damage would go. The fragile balance between loyalty to his wife and loyalty to his mother had finally tipped, and the consequences would be nothing short of catastrophic. The gradual erosion of Liam's once unshakable trust in his wife was a slow, insidious process. Eleanor's influence over him, something he had once dismissed as harmless maternal concern, now began to take a darker turn. Her words, once soft suggestions, became deliberate manipulations. What had started as simple disapproval of Sophia had morphed into a relentless campaign to tear apart his relationship with the woman he had vowed to love and protect. But Liam, clouded by his own insecurities and desperate need for his mother's approval, failed to see the danger unfolding before him. It started innocently enough, casual comments and offhand remarks. "Sophia was working late again, wasn't she?" Eleanor would say, her voice laced with concern. "I saw her car outside the museum. Seems like she's spending more and more time there, doesn't it? Not even a simple dinner at home with you." Liam would brush off the comment at first. He trusted Sophia, knew her work was demanding, and he never once questioned her commitment to their marriage. But Eleanor knew exactly where to strike, and her subtle insinuations began to gnaw at the edges of his trust. A few weeks later, Eleanor's insinuations became more pointed. "Did you notice how close she seemed with that new donor at the museum? The one who's so taken with her art expertise?" Eleanor would ask, always framing her concerns in a way that made it seem like she was only looking out for Liam's best interests. Her voice would tremble with concern, as though she were merely a concerned mother trying to protect her son from heartbreak. Liam, though initially dismissive of these remarks, began to feel a slight shift within himself. Eleanor had always been right about so many things, hadn't she? His father, Thomas, had trusted her implicitly, and she had always been there for him, guiding him, shaping him, helping him make the right decisions. Maybe, just maybe, she was right about Sophia too. The doubts that had been planted were small at first, almost imperceptible, but they began to fester. His confidence in Sophia's loyalty, once rock solid, began to erode. It wasn't just Eleanor's words that were altering Liam's perception. It was the growing distance between him and Sophia. His once loving wife had become increasingly distant, her smiles more forced, her answers to his questions about her day growing shorter and less detailed. When he asked about her late nights at the museum, she would brush him off with vague explanations, but in his mind, the seeds of doubt were already beginning to take root. Liam began to notice things he had once overlooked. The way her phone buzzed late at night when they were in bed together, the faint smile she gave when she glanced at a text message she quickly hid from his view. "Who's texting you at 2 a.m., he would ask, his voice barely masking the unease he felt. She would laugh it off, "Just work stuff, Liam. You know how it is." But the doubt remained, gnawing at him like a slow-burning fire. Even her new wardrobe didn't escape his notice. Sophia, who had always dressed with simple elegance, now seemed to be making an effort to look more polished, more fashionable. The new clothes, the makeup she started wearing on nights she didn't have events, everything began to feel like a sign of something more. He began to imagine that she was dressing up not for him, but for someone else. And that thought sent a cold shiver down his spine. The once strong connection he had with Sophia started to feel tenuous, strained under the weight of his growing suspicions. He threw himself deeper into his work at Parker & Company, unable to face the uncomfortable reality that was developing at home. Long hours at the office became his escape, an excuse to avoid confronting the mounting tension between him and Sophia. The more he immersed himself in his career, the more distant he became from the woman he had once been so deeply in love with. He was too consumed by the thought of betrayal, by the doubt that had wormed its way into his mind, to see the woman who had stood by him through everything. His paranoia grew as the weeks went by. He began to scrutinize every interaction between Sophia and anyone who wasn't him. He noticed the way she laughed a little too easily with a male colleague at a party, how she seemed to get quieter when he asked about her day. Each seemingly innocent interaction was now twisted into something sinister in his mind. He even began to question the trust he had in his own perceptions, wondering if Eleanor had been right all along. Had Sophia been hiding something from him? Was she really the woman he had married, or was she someone completely different, someone who had always been playing him? It wasn't until he overheard a conversation between Sophia and a friend, caught on a late evening when he happened to be walking past her office, that the last thread of trust snapped. He had been on his way to the kitchen for a drink when he heard Sophia's voice, louder than usual. He froze in the hallway, unable to move, as he listened to her laughing softly, a private conversation that sounded like it held secrets she wasn't sharing with him. Liam wouldn't understand, Sophia was saying, her voice trailing off into an uncomfortable laugh. Liam's heart sank. It's not that simple. I just don't want to hurt him. The word stung, sharper than he expected. He didn't hear the rest of the conversation. He couldn't bring himself to. The seed of doubt, already deeply planted, had now taken root as a certainty. She was hiding something. He wasn't enough for her. The rage that had been simmering beneath the surface boiled over in that instant. At that moment, everything changed. Liam, once so logical and composed, found himself consumed by a primal urge to confront the woman who, in his mind, had betrayed him. The man who had once trusted and loved his wife now saw her as a stranger. A woman who had deceived him. And more than that, a woman who had somehow allowed his mother to be right all along. Liam's transformation from a loving husband to a suspicious, paranoid man was now complete. The battle for his heart, for his loyalty, had been lost, and it was Eleanor who had won, without ever having to lift a finger. Eleanor's machinations had succeeded. The path she had set in motion, with each carefully planted seed of doubt, had finally culminated in the destruction of the relationship she had always feared would take Liam away from her. And now, in the silence of their home, where once there had been love, there was only suspicion, distance, and the looming shadow of betrayal. Liam had become a man consumed by his mother's lies, and he was about to make a decision that would change the course of their lives forever. The tension that had been quietly simmering beneath the surface of the Harrison household reached a boiling point on the evening of November 17, 2023. Liam, driven by the storm of doubt and suspicion his mother had carefully cultivated, found himself standing at the edge of a precipice. His mind, clouded by jealousy and confusion, pushed him toward a decision that, only days earlier, would have seemed unfathomable. But now, with every passing moment, the line between right and wrong seemed to blur. It had been an ordinary Thursday evening, but for Liam, nothing felt ordinary anymore. The familiar walls of their home on Maple Avenue seemed to close in on him. He had spent the entire day in a fog, barely functioning, unable to shake the conversations that had been echoing in his mind, his mother's warnings, her insinuations, and Sophia's increasingly distant behavior. He couldn't trust his wife. He couldn't trust himself. The idea that Sophia was hiding something from him, something that he couldn't even begin to understand, consumed him. Sophia, for her part, had sensed the growing distance between them. She had tried, time and again, to bridge the widening gap. She suggested a quiet dinner together, a weekend getaway to the beach, anything to break the suffocating routine that had overtaken their marriage. But Liam had refused. His work at the law firm was always the excuse, the lie he told himself to justify his withdrawal. The man who had once been so full of love for her, who had made her feel cherished and special, was now a shell of that person. And it wasn't just his withdrawal that hurt her, it was the way he had begun to look at her. There was a coldness in his eyes, a look of suspicion that cut deeper than any words could. That evening, after Sophia had spent hours at the museum curating a new exhibit, she came home late, as she often did. The moment she stepped through the door, she could feel the shift in the air. Liam was standing by the kitchen counter, his posture rigid, his face twisted with an emotion she couldn't quite place. She forced a smile, though it didn't reach her eyes. "Hey, Liam," "How was your day?" she asked, trying to keep her voice light, trying to ignore the growing unease in her chest. Liam didn't answer immediately. His eyes scanned her face, searching for something, anything that might confirm his suspicions. "You're late again, Sophia. I've been waiting here for hours." Sophia blinked, taken aback by his tone. She had seen Liam angry before, but this felt different. "I'm sorry," she began, setting her bag down. "I was finishing up some work for the upcoming exhibit. You know how it is. I told you I'd be late." Liam's jaw tightened. "And I suppose that's all it was, right? Just work?" The words came out harshly, sharper than she was used to. Sophia's smile faltered as she tried to gauge his mood. "Of course. You know how important this project is to me." But as she spoke, she noticed something in his eyes, a flicker of something dark, something accusing. Her heart sank. Something was wrong, and she could feel it in the pit of her stomach. "Something's not right, Sophia," Liam muttered, stepping closer, his voice low but intense. "You've been distant. I've been patient, but this can't go on." Sophia took a step back, her mind racing. "What are you talking about? Liam, what's going on?" "You tell me," Liam snapped. "You're hiding something from me. I know it. You've been acting differently. And I've been a fool not to see it sooner. It's all right there, in front of me, isn't it?" His voice was rising now, tinged with anger and frustration. "You've been having an affair, haven't you?" Sophia's eyes widened in shock. The accusation hit her like a slap to the face. She couldn't process it. "Liam, what are you talking about?" she gasped, her heart racing. "No. How could you think that? You know I would never." But Liam wasn't listening. His mind, already poisoned by Eleanor's whispers and his own insecurities, had already made up its mind. The doubt, the jealousy, the fear, it all collided into one overwhelming surge of emotion. In his eyes, Sophia's denials were just more proof of her guilt. "You think I'm blind?" Liam's voice was low now, barely a whisper, but there was a lethal edge to it. "I saw the way you looked at him, the donor. The way you smiled when you talked about him. You've been lying to me this whole time, and I trusted you. But not anymore." Sophia recoiled as though struck by a physical blow. Her chest tightened with pain. "Liam, please, listen to me. You've misunderstood. It's not what you think. There's nothing between me and..." But before she could finish, Liam was already shaking his head. "I don't want to hear it," he shouted, his voice cracking with emotion. "I know the truth now." The anger inside him was overwhelming, a storm of emotions he couldn't control. His hands, which had once been so gentle with her, now shook with fury. Sophia, her face pale and eyes wide with fear, took a cautious step forward. "Liam, please, don't do this," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You're hurting me." But it was too late. Liam, his mind a haze of suspicion and rage, acted without thinking. In one swift motion, he shoved Sophia, his hands landing hard on her shoulders. The force of it sent her stumbling backward. Her head struck the sharp corner of the marble kitchen island with a sickening crack. The sound echoed through the room, a horrific noise that made Liam freeze in horror. Sophia crumpled to the floor, her body limp, blood trickling from the gash on her temple. For a moment, everything went still. The house, once filled with laughter and life, was now engulfed in a suffocating silence. Liam stood there, staring at his wife's unmoving form, his chest heaving as the reality of what he had done began to sink in. A cold, sickening wave of guilt washed over him, but it was too late. The damage had been done. In the distance, the faint sound of sirens began to approach, but it felt like a world away. He had crossed a line from which there was no return. And as the truth settled in, Liam realized that no matter what happened next, his life, his marriage, would never be the same again. The stillness of the Harrison home was broken only by the faint hum of the refrigerator and the distant wail of sirens that seemed to draw closer with each passing second. In the wake of Sophia's violent fall, the chaos that erupted within Liam's mind was matched only by the shock that reverberated through the quiet suburban streets of Woodland Heights. The life Liam had built, the life he had once cherished, was in ruins, and the actions of that night would soon be examined in the cold light of a police investigation that threatened to expose the darkest corners of his soul. The police arrived at the scene with grim efficiency. By the time Detective Quinn Harper stepped through the front door of the Harrison home, the room where the tragedy had unfolded was already sealed off, the once welcoming space now a crime scene. Quinn, a seasoned detective with the Woodland Heights Police Department, had seen her fair share of domestic disturbances, but there was something about this case that felt different, a gut feeling that the truth behind Sophia's death was not as straightforward as it seemed. Liam sat in the living room, his hands trembling as he stared blankly at the floor, his mind a whirlwind of emotions. When the officers had arrived, he had offered no resistance, no protest. His shock was palpable, his words disjointed as he explained the series of events leading up to Sophia's fall. But his version of the story, however tragic, didn't quite add up. "I didn't mean to," Liam's voice cracked as he spoke, his eyes welling up with tears. She was lying to me. She didn't tell me the truth about who she was meeting, and I just lost control. I never thought. I didn't mean to hurt her." Detective Harper, a sharp investigator known for her attention to detail, studied him closely. There was something in his manner, something in the way he fidgeted with his hands, that made her question the sincerity of his words. She had been trained to read people, to see through the veil of emotion to the truth hidden beneath. And something about Liam Harrison's story wasn't sitting right with her. As the initial statements were taken, Quinn began to focus on the physical evidence. Sophia's body, still lying lifeless on the kitchen floor, told its own story. The angle of her head, the way her body had collapsed against the island, everything pointed to an accidental fall. But accidents didn't usually leave a person's head cracked open like that. And the blood, the way it pooled beneath her, was too much to ignore. Quinn's gut told her this wasn't a simple accident. Someone had pushed Sophia. Someone had used force, and Liam was the only person in the house at the time. As the investigation deepened, Quinn's suspicions grew. She knew the case would be complicated, domestic violence often was. But she also knew that the truth had a way of coming to light, no matter how many lies were spun. What started as a simple inquiry into a domestic disturbance soon turned into a search for a much deeper, darker truth. The first breakthrough came when Quinn began to question the timeline. According to Liam, he had been in the kitchen when Sophia arrived home late from the museum. He claimed they had argued briefly before she fell, but there were inconsistencies in his story. Quinn had learned that Liam had called his mother just before the incident occurred, something that wasn't mentioned in his initial statement. It was a small detail, but it was enough to raise alarm bells. When Quinn looked into the phone records, she found a series of long calls between Liam and his mother, Eleanor, stretching into the late hours of the evening. The most recent call, just moments before Sophia's arrival, was particularly troubling. The conversation seemed to carry an unnerving weight, and Eleanor's involvement in the events surrounding Sophia's death began to look more suspicious with each passing hour. Quinn knew that Eleanor Harrison was a woman of considerable influence in Woodland Heights, and she had a reputation for being fiercely protective of her son. The more Quinn dug into the Harrison family's history, the more she began to see how tightly Eleanor had woven herself into Liam's life. From the moment Liam had been born, Eleanor had shaped his world. She had been the constant figure in his life, guiding him, controlling him, and now, it seemed, she had played a more direct role in shaping the tragic events that had led to Sophia's death. As the investigation deepened, Quinn began to look into Eleanor's background. She spoke to friends and colleagues who knew her well. One former neighbor, Clara Mills, who had known the Harrisons for years, mentioned something that caught Quinn's attention. Clara spoke of Eleanor's presence at the Harrison home just before the incident, long before the police had been called. Eleanor had been there, she said, but she had left just before Liam had arrived home. Clara's account contradicted Liam's version of events, where he claimed that his mother had arrived only after the tragedy occurred. Quinn's suspicion grew as she pieced together these inconsistencies. Eleanor's timing, her movements, and the way she had carefully orchestrated her appearances began to form a picture of a woman who had planned the situation with alarming precision. The next critical break came when Quinn and her team discovered that Liam's version of events didn't match up with Sophia's movements on the night of her death. A deep dive into her work schedule revealed that Sophia had not been meeting a donor, as Liam had suggested, but had been working late at the museum, finalizing an exhibit. No meetings had taken place, and there had been no reason for Sophia to be in contact with anyone other than her colleagues. This made Liam's suspicions seem baseless, but it also raised further questions about his motivations. Had Eleanor planted these seeds of doubt in his mind, knowing that it would push him over the edge? The final piece of the puzzle came when Quinn uncovered financial records that linked Eleanor to a series of payments. These payments were traced to a known hacker, someone who had helped manipulate digital evidence in the past. Quinn's team discovered that Eleanor had hired this hacker to fabricate evidence of Sophia's infidelity. Text messages, emails, and even fake social media posts had been doctored to make it appear as if Sophia was having an affair. The hacker, identified only by the alias Phantom, had done his job well, creating a digital trail of deceit that had poisoned Liam's perception of his wife. As the pieces fell into place, Quinn realized the full extent of Eleanor's manipulation. She had used every tool at her disposal to drive a wedge between Liam and Sophia. Her obsession with controlling Liam, with keeping him under her thumb, had led to a tragic and irreversible conclusion. Eleanor had carefully crafted a narrative that pushed her son into a state of paranoia, where every action of Sophia's was viewed through the lens of betrayal. The moment of reckoning came when Liam, unable to live with the weight of his actions, finally cracked. His confession came in a series of disjointed, frantic words to Detective Harper, who listened quietly as he spilled the truth about the night of the incident. But the real confession would come later, as the investigation moved into the courtroom, where Eleanor's role in the tragedy would be laid bare for all to see. The trial of Liam and Eleanor Harrison captivated not only the community of Woodland Heights but also the entire state. The courtrooms were packed, the buzz of anticipation palpable in the air. The Harrison family, once considered the ideal example of success and prosperity, now found themselves at the center of a scandal so dark that it would forever alter the image of their perfect world. Liam's defense team, recognizing the overwhelming evidence of his actions, opted for a plea of temporary insanity. They argued that the emotional manipulation and the digital fabrications orchestrated by his mother had driven him to the brink, pushing him to act in a moment of uncontrollable rage. The jury heard testimony after testimony about Eleanor's domineering influence over her son, how she had subtly poisoned his mind against his wife, feeding him doubts and insecurities until the truth was no longer clear to him. The mental health experts brought in to testify painted a picture of a man who had been emotionally and psychologically manipulated to the point of snapping. Despite the compelling arguments presented by the defense, the jury still struggled with the fact that Liam had, in the end, physically attacked his wife, whether in a fit of rage or not. The evidence was irrefutable. Sophia had been an innocent victim in all of this, a woman whose life was cut short by the very person she had loved and trusted. After weeks of testimony, the jury finally reached a verdict. Liam Harrison was found guilty of manslaughter rather than murder, with the judge taking into account the emotional and psychological manipulation he had endured. He was sentenced to 15 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 10 years. The courtroom was silent as the sentence was read aloud. Liam, his face pale and drawn, bowed his head as the weight of the decision settled over him. His once bright future, his career, and his marriage were now irrevocably lost. But the true trial was only just beginning for Eleanor Harrison. As the mastermind behind the twisted web of lies that had led to Sophia's death, Eleanor's fate was far graver. The prosecution painted her as a woman consumed by jealousy and an obsessive need to control her son's life, even at the cost of another person's life. The trial revealed the full extent of her manipulations, from the fake digital evidence to the way she had planted doubt in Liam's mind. Eleanor's defense tried to argue that her actions were driven by maternal love, but the jury was not moved by her pleas. The truth was undeniable. Eleanor Harrison had orchestrated a conspiracy to ruin her son's life, to break up his marriage, and ultimately, to push him into a situation where he would destroy the one person who stood between her and the total control she desired. Eleanor was convicted on all counts, including conspiracy to commit murder, and was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The courtroom was filled with the heavy weight of her sentence, but the tears that fell from the eyes of Sophia's family were a stark reminder that no amount of justice could bring back the woman they had lost. The world had been forever changed by Eleanor's obsession and the destruction she had wrought. In the aftermath of the trials, Woodland Heights struggled to come to terms with what had transpired. The picture-perfect facade that had once defined the Harrison family was shattered beyond repair. Neighbors who had once admired Eleanor and Liam now saw them through a different lens, a family that had hidden a dark secret beneath their polished exterior. The community was left to pick up the pieces, grappling with the devastating realization that even the most ideal of families can harbor the most sinister of secrets. For Liam, the road to redemption would be long and uncertain. The man who had once been a rising star in the legal world was now a convict, his reputation destroyed. His marriage to Sophia had ended in tragedy, and the love he once shared with her had been irrevocably tainted by the manipulations of the woman he had trusted most, his mother. As for Eleanor, the once powerful matriarch of Woodland Heights, she would spend the rest of her life behind bars, a cautionary tale of the dangers of overbearing love, control, and the terrifying consequences of a mother's obsession with her child. This tragedy left everyone involved to reflect on the darker side of human nature, the destructive power of manipulation and control, and the irreversible damage it can cause to families. In the end, it was clear that love, when twisted and warped by obsession, can lead to devastation beyond anyone's imagination. What do you think about this story? This is a tragic tale of love gone wrong, manipulation, and family secrets, but it raises some important questions. How far can a parent's love go before it becomes toxic? Can manipulation truly destroy a person's sense of reality? What do you think of Liam's actions, and how do you feel about Eleanor's role in the tragedy? Let us know in the comments below. If you found this story intriguing, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more true crime documentaries. And remember, if you have any thoughts or reactions to this case, we'd love to hear them.